96 ABC Hobart and ABC Northern Tasmania. It's your afternoon. Peter Degraves. Now, his business legacies live on in Cascade Brewery, in shipbuilding, the Theatre Royal, which hasn't even changed much since Peter was part of the first design. But Sophia, who was married to him, all you'll find of her is really the date she had children and the date she died. So, what was her life like? Raising the children with a husband in and out of jail, with a life bouncing around the extremes according to her husband's ambitions and failings. And Blythe-Cooper has blended historical fact with her own answers to the questions of Sophia's life. You might have been hearing about this work over the years, but just this weekend gone, she has officially released The Shape of Water. Imagine fragments from an elusive life. And your baby is out in the world.
It's out in the world.
How long have you been working on this?
Basically 10 years. I did my initial research. I spent the greater part of 2007 actually writing, and then I've spent the next decade tweaking. I've travelled twice to the UK to do more research. I've spent a lot of time online, and what has been good is in the last couple of years a lot more has come online, particularly colonial stuff, things in India. The inception of Sophia's story does appear to have been in India, and that's all come online. So yes, tweaking for a decade.
So for people who haven't heard, where'd the original idea come from?
I'm a school teacher, and under the now defunct Essential Learnings curriculum, I was given the task of creating a film with a mixed age group of students. A great idea. We wrote it, we researched it, we travelled to historic venues, we used the Female Factory, the Theatre Royal, the Brewery, of course, other historic venues. Did some songwriting, editing. It was a really holistic project. We were lucky enough to have a girl in the ensemble who is a descendant of Isaac Solomon. You know, Ike Solomon?
Yes.
Of course, the chap on whom Dickens based his Fagin character. And that really made the whole thing live for us. So when it was over, we really felt a sense of incompleteness. And I did ask the chap who played Peter, I said, what do you think he was really like? And he said, you know, I don't think he was a really nice bloke. And I started with the idea of writing a work of young adult fiction. I shortly realised that it wasn't, so it is an adult novel, but it was based on the premise, what would it have been like to have been her? We know a lot about prominent men in history, we know a lot about prominent women, but the prominent women are often vilified for operating outside their gender role. They're either a femme fatale or a witch or, you know, of dubious virtue. We need to look at what ordinary women were doing, or we're missing half the story.
This is Anne Blythe-Cooper with you. She has released this book, The Shape of Water, Imagined Fragments from an Elusive Life, asking what Sophia Degraves' life was like. She's with you on your afternoon on ABC Local Radio Tasmania. Why do you see there was always some chemistry between the two of them?
Look, I wrote them that way. She had as many as 20 pregnancies. She had 8 surviving children, but I think to have been churning out the babies, you know, well into middle age, there must have been some sort of chemistry there. And there's no doubt that Peter Degraves was an incredibly charismatic person. He was not well liked. He had the knack of getting on the wrong side of people. Incredibly intelligent, the sort of person who could look at anything being done and think, yes, I know how to do that, and then he would tell everyone that he could. He touted himself as being a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor. He said he could do anything. In actual fact, he had an apprenticeship in trade. He certainly had the gift of the gab. So I think, you know, he
worked on her as much as on anyone else.
And I have had a lot of hints of illegitimate children. There are a couple of lines in Tasmania where the name Degraves continues as a middle name. I think he was a pretty charismatic guy. He was definitely a bad boy, and we know that women sometimes are drawn to those bad boys, and then they pay for it their lifelong.
Well, that's what you imagine about her, is when he's in jail, when the water's been cut off to Hobart Town and the finger's pointed at her family, she's the one who's there in the community to deal with it. How much did you get into the historical situations to put her in the middle of them?
Oh, look, I lived and breathed it. I lived and breathed it to such a degree that I felt, you know, I could just ring up any one of the family for a chat because I lived the whole thing. I mean, I had to use my imagination, but Peter Degraves went to prison in the first year of their marriage for the theft of £3,000 worth of fabric. That is an enormous sum. When people were being transported for the theft of a silk handkerchief. He spent a year in prison, and I'm not sure how he extricated himself from that, but she lost her first child in that year when he was in prison. I think her illusions of marriage must have been somewhat shattered, and yet, she's there till the end. She's dragged to the Isle of Lewis, which is a very northernmost, very wind-blown island, where more ventures failed. She loses children everywhere she went, and then she's dragged down here. She buries a baby in Cape Town. She loses a child at sea. He's in prison here for 5 years. She loses 3 daughters. So she did actually bear a child to him whilst he was in prison here for 5 years. That was for debts that he left behind in England. So I'm assuming she had visitation rights, or he had some leeway. There was a system called rules, so there would have been like a day release system. But I think how difficult to have your husband in prison, you're surviving on your own, you bear a child, and that child only lives 10 days. I wanted to get inside the head of this woman and work out how she maintained her integrity and her inner life and her sanity in these circumstances when she was physically and socially isolated.
Having started knowing his story and really only having dates connected to her life, what information have you found about her as you've gone along?
The most I know about Sophia is her very curiously well-documented death. There was an inquest into her death. Peter wasn't here at the time. He was in Port Phillip. It appears she probably had goiter because she died from breathing difficulties associated with a lump on her neck. She died in the arms of her son. The other thing I have found, everyone says that Hugh McIntosh, Peter's business partner, was her brother. That is definitely not the case. So even the Australian Dictionary of Biography says she was Sophia Degraves nee McIntosh. She may have been some sort of cousin, and that's what I call her in the book, but she wasn't Hugh's sister. And Hugh spent most of his life in India. She probably has some sort of provenance there. But what I did find is Hugh McIntosh's illegitimate son. He was alleged to have brought a child here, but no child turned up. He jumped ship at Cape Town to try to make his way in the East India Company. I found all that son's illegitimate daughters. Peter had a brother who had illegitimate children in India. So India is where I really need to go next to try and find out. There were families that lived there for generations and generations. And there was this kind of understanding that what happened in India stayed in India.
And Blythe-Cooper with you on ABC Local Radio. You talk about mother dying in the son's arms. You've also talked about having made a film with your students back in the earliest days of this project, and it's spawning the idea how both of those things kind of come together in play form.
Yes, the launch was last Friday, and that was a wonderful occasion. I'm currently performing in Pride and Prejudice, the new musical, and my friend Luella Jewellery wrote a beautiful song that was performed, and my son and I, he's an actor also, performed a play, a 5-minute version, in which it's based on when a chap called Edward Markham visited in 1834. He was just a young man doing a round tour. He came to visit the Degraves, and his diary documents the event and what transpired that day. So that's a really good starting point. And in the context of that, I have a play where the male character changes costume and becomes her cousin. Hugh McIntosh becomes Robert Lathrop Murray, who evicts Sophia from her home when Peter's in jail, becomes various other characters on Sophia's journey. And it culminates in her death in the arms of her son.
And where will you be performing it?
I've negotiated with Cascade. That will happen up at the Visitor Centre over the summer on Sundays, Mondays and Fridays at 2 p.m.
So really taking the time to relax over your summer holidays from teaching. Release a book, perform a play over the summer. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It's been a very long and obviously diligent process getting this happening. And it is out in the world. It's The Shape of Water, Imagined Fragments from an Elusive Life. It is Sophia Degraves of Van Diemen's Land, as imagined and researched by Blythe-Cooper. And when does your show start at Cascade, if people want to see that?
6th of January.
All right. Well, I hope you get some rest over summer as well.
Thank you very much, Helen.
936 ABC Hobart, ABC Northern Tasmania. It is 12 to 4.
Hello, I'm Louise Saunders. The ABC Giving Tree Appeal is Tasmania's largest Christmas charity, raising money and collecting gifts to donate to disadvantaged and vulnerable people. We're asking you to give what you can. Place a gift under the tree or donate money online at abc.net.au/Hobart. Proceeds from the Giving Tree Appeal go to a range of charities around Tasmania, helping you help those in need. The 2016 ABC Giving Tree.
I forgot to mention something significant about this date and Anne Blythe-Cooper and her work, The Shape of Water. What happened 2 years ago today?
Well, I had to be reminded by Facebook this morning that 2 years ago today, I was the runner-up recipient of the inaugural Erica Bell Award for this novel as an unpublished manuscript. So I have this anxiety, that the book might not actually be any good, but it's had some critical acclaim already.
Yeah, and in what can be such a slow and solitary and at times tedious journey, working it, reworking it, how encouraging was it to be named?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And to be so well supported by 40 South, who are publishing it.
Well, beautifully done. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
See, it would have been better if I'd said that about you instead of making you say it yourself, but thank you. Just doing my job for me. I appreciate it. 10 to 4. Let me know if there are any problems.